discussion, please.
So I cannot sing, or if I did, you would not be happy. But you will, I hope, be happy to know that my talk from the little wolf follows the big wolf as an example from how culture is changing and is both shaped by the brain and shapes it. So if you may see my slides, please. That moment of trepidation, fear and trembling. Well, it didn't go there. Good.
I think you need
I will
a
sit.
microphone.
I will sit right here. How's this? Can this do it?
We'd love to have you.
Okay, I'll do it right here. My talk is about, can lessons from the reading brain help us with children at the periphery of human existence? I'll be speaking on behalf of my lab at Tufts, the MIT Media Lab, and my group Curious Learning from Georgia State University. In essence, I want to give you 20 minutes of a different view of literacy, the depths of it, the complexity of it, and what makes our discussions, especially by Dan yesterday, so much more complicated than what they may appear at the start. We are literally connecting knowledge bases from genetics, from brain regions, neural circuitry, translating that into a cognitive behavior. But yesterday, something beautiful happened. And Dan, I think you said it, and Mary, you said it too. For the first time, I am hearing science about literacy in the reading brain being connected to moral imagination and what we might do with bringing science and this sense of morality together. And so I ground it actually in a wonderful theologian whose anniversary is last week of his death, and he is one of my great teachers. And he said this: wisdom is in a conjoining of knowing and loving, like Polanyi's critical lucidity and an intense moral conscience. In essence, I think that's what we have been doing these last 2 days, more than most conferences. It is a beautiful thought that we can bring all of that together. And I want to bring together in 17 minutes, and not letting any of you fall asleep, including you, Chancellor, or you, Professor Arbert, who I woke up in my last talk here. I will be watching, that's why I'm walking around. I want to connect what we know about the reading brain with the potential of every child, but especially the children who are disenfranchised. Whatever numbers we use, 57 million have no schools, 120 to 50 million will never be literate, regardless of what definition we use. We've heard about sub-Saharan Africa and India, but we also have our own backyard in the United States, where 61% of our children who are African American, 26% European American, 54% Hispanic or Latino, will never become truly literate in a fluent sense from 4th grade on. This is a set of figures that is impossible and unconscionable, and has nothing to do with my area of research in dyslexia. It is about largely the environment that we can change. And I look to this wonderful quotation, and it goes straight back to so many of our talks. Poverty is not an accident. Like slavery and apartheid, it is man-made and can be removed by the actions of human beings. That's our work. And I have to say, Gonzalo, I look to you from yesterday on. There was a tone set by you and by all of us. We can change this, but there is a chain that must be changed. And in my small world of the reading brain, we look to it to help us understand 3 lessons for today. There's actually a 4th, Courtney, that you might ask me about, but the lessons that I'm going to be talking about are how reading develops from this circuit that actually Volsinger just gave us the basic principles of. How can we use our understanding of that reading brain circuit to change our understanding of instruction, intervention, and our work in the future in technology on global literacy? What are the ways that intervention and instruction for children who are struggling, how can that help us understand what we will or are able to do next in our future? I will not, except in questions, talk about both the promise and the threat of our digital interventions. There is much to be said about the differences in mediums. I won't do that except in our questions, but I do hope there will be some of those questions. So it begins with a mystery, and actually goes back to Wolf. There are no genes for reading. We have the capacity epigenetically to form new circuits. That's part of the beauty of our brain. We can form new cognitive functions because of certain basic design principles. And here I use my colleague Stanislas Dehaene, in particular his view on neuronal recycling. We can recycle, we can rearrange, we can repurpose neurons for new, absolutely new cognitive functions. But we do so within a niche, a neuronal niche, so there are limits on that. But at its most basic, what we do when we read is to take existing networks. We make an entire new circuitry based on those original networks for vision, cognition, and language. Now, it is not a fixed circuit. If we just look at these languages, you look immediately at Chinese and Japanese, and you will see the extra right hemisphere cortical areas as well as some temporal areas that are there only for Chinese. Because why? Because how many characters do you need at 5th grade when you speak Chinese? What's the guess? At least 5,000. And we are complaining about 26 letters with no stopping. The reality is that reading circuit will reflect the writing system. It will also reflect the medium, which is a different story than today, but I hope we can talk about it. But the first lesson, if you will, from all of this is that each new reader, whatever the environment, has to create a new circuit from older cognitive linguistic structures and their connections. Where they are there or where they are not developing will make a complete difference in the circuitry. That early reading brain depends completely on what goes into the circuit. Our phonemes are essential. We can talk about the differences in different languages and having bilingual and biliteral children, but the phonemes of that first language are essential. The orthography, learning the patterns of whatever writing system. Semantic development cannot be overemphasized, especially when we're talking about children at the periphery of existence. We are talking about children with completely radically different vocabularies when we have different environments. Even in the United States, we have a gap of 32 million words heard or not heard between our privileged homes and our underprivileged homes. Now, if I am trying to argue that we are making this circuitry for the reading brain based on all these issues, differences in vocabulary and cognition will make a completely different reading circuit. So the child who at 3 and 4 has this kind of gap is different in kindergarten. The children who we are working with in Ethiopia will be very different. And we have to take that into account when we're thinking about this circuit. Now, this is your brain. This is your reading circuit. You do everything in about 280 milliseconds. And then, and I will look at Elena because I'm going to expect her to do what I can't do in this talk. After those first 280 milliseconds, we become the readers who have the capacity for deep reading. Now, deep reading may or may not happen, may or may not be formed, but we have the capacity between 100 and 200 milliseconds to think our own thoughts. I call this the Pristine Principle, where we can go beyond the wisdom of the author to discover our own thoughts. And when we're talking about reading and decoding and all of our efforts, skolas, all these beautiful efforts, amitra, all of these efforts are about helping our children move into the ability for critical analysis, for true deep thinking, for true deep reading. And there's a principle that Wolf Singer was talking about that I want to make very explicit in the reading brain. Deep reading depends on these schemata, this background knowledge. Without the background knowledge, you can't make analogies. Now, I want you to think, at least in pause, about our children who are over-reliant on another external platform of knowledge rather than an internal one. But it is essential that we recognize the importance of all these principles. And Elena, I know you're going to go into critical thinking so much that I won't do any of that which I would ordinarily do because you will do it. Rather, I will emphasize one aspect that I think we are talking a great deal about today, which is part of the essence of deep reading. And that's our ability to be transported outside ourselves, to have empathy. Actually, Wolf, it's your daughter who taught me a great deal about the circuitry for empathy and the necessity for theory of mind networks when we think about perspective taking. She works with adults. I think she should also work with children. I think it's very important that we understand, and Marcelo, I gave you this quote another time, the concept of passing over. This is a theological concept from John Donne, but it's the essence of perspective taking that can happen during reading. This is what we want for our children to develop, that sense of other, empathy, understanding. The second lesson is from our ability to actually, I'll go back to this, to look at the cerebral diversity. And here, Dr. Tomlinson, I'm really thinking of you that from your talk this morning. Dyslexia represents a brain that's been here 30, 40,000 years, well before we were able to read. It's a different organization that precedes reading. It's an extraordinary brain, and we can learn a great deal from it. That's another question I hope someone asks. We did a Smithsonian film on why Leonardo da Vinci most likely was our most famous dyslexic. But the reality is that understanding differences helps us build interventions that go after that reading circuit in particular ways. So what we are doing in instruction and intervention with struggling readers and children is to take this map, if you will, this reading circuit, and use it as the basis of our intervention. So we have metacognitive strategies. This happens to be a linguistic one on the semantic neighborhood. We take deep reading as a whole set of strategies. I only use this as a 1-minute example so that you understand that what we are about to do in this next 5 minutes is to take our insights from the reading brain for the typical reader, for the reading brain for the dyslexic and struggling reader, and use those to understand what must be addressed in our reading interventions for children who have no schools and no teachers. And so the third lesson for this talk is, can we take the knowing we have about the plasticity of the reading brain and our understanding of intervention, and can it help us in 2 ways? Can it inform us? Now, a whole part of my talk, which I would love to give, is all the changes that all of you are going through as you become completely immersed, a different reader in a digital culture. Can this understanding help us with the changes in attention and memory that are occurring in adults as well as in the formation of a child? But for today, can this knowledge give us the most hope, some of the most hopeful possibilities about using the democratization of knowledge possible in technology with our understanding of the reading brain to address global literacy. So our question is, can we create an experience on a tablet that can help children learn to read who have no schools or teachers in the most remote parts of the world? With Matt Keller's help, we began with 2 villages in Ethiopia, Wanchi and Walanchiti. This is a group from MIT, from Georgia State, and Tufts, and it's called Curious Learning. And we are trying, and Dan, wherever you are, where's Dan? Dan. So what I really want to emphasize in this is that what we are trying to do is take the reading brain knowledge about that circuitry as the basis of curation, content development, and evaluation. So it's an open source platform with apps that are largely, actually Dan said that the same thing that we would. There's such mediocrity in so many of our educational apps, but there are some that are decent, and we're working with developers so that that circuit is being addressed in as close and developmental a manner as we can. Now, Dan, I'm also going to use you because you said one of the most beautiful things at the end of your talk. You asked the question, would it be possible to have our desire for empathy, our desire for understanding other, our desire even for ethical development, could that be folded in some of our literacy work? I practically stood up and cheered, because that is one of our goals. Can we take some of our earliest stories? And I was going to emphasize the fact that we're trying to do it with STEM skills, so that we're really having the children from the start think about inference with the tiniest stories that they have. But we're also developing stories that are about animals and about people who are other. And how can we take those earliest stories and make it part of the formation, not only of one kind of literacy, but of many kinds of literacies, including moral one. And so we have 3 or 4 educational contexts. And here, Professor Blamont, this is the question that you asked me about, and I wanted to tell you. So we are trying to understand, where will these tablets work best under what conditions? And the first condition, thanks to Matt, was in 2 villages very remote in Ethiopia. Gonzalo, I don't know whether you know though, but you probably do. One of them, however, has water aplenty, and the other does not. And therein lies a difference that we could see from simply, looking at brain circumference with the eye and also with behaviors. But this first group is a group that we use principles, Dr. von Braun, that are similar to what you were saying about child as agent. These children began to be each other's teachers, and Sid, you also talked about that. We call it child-driven learning without a romantic connotation. I do not over-romanticize child-driven learning, but it exists and can be used for great purpose. But it does not mean, and here again I'm turning to you, Wolf, that this is optimal. We are next, I'm going to be talking a tiny bit about South Africa, but we are trying to compare what is it with an adult, without an adult, with an attached granny who may not even be literate or not. So these are the various questions we're having. This little boy, Marcelo and Carola have seen this little boy, and Matt has met him. He is a prodigy. He is a child. This was an old Motorola Zoom. This is 3 years ago. It is clunky. It is hard to turn on. He turned it on in 4 minutes and said, I got mine on. I'm the lion. It's a myth. It's the stuff of myth in our group. But this is his older sister. Let's grab her and watch what the older girls do.
Kun maal jedhamti?
Cat,
Tuni hoo?
dog,
Tuni hoo maal jedhamti?
cow,
Tun?
donkey,
Tun?
horse,
Tun?
mother,
Tunillee?
father,
Kun maal jedhama?
baby.
Babe.
This is not reading. This is sight word recognition. It is a precursor. And that's really the limit of where we are in that setting. I have 2 seconds left, not even. In Uganda, in preschools, in South Africa, in settlement schools, in India, in very informal schools, in rural Alabama and Georgia, we are comparing what is happening when there is a teacher, when there is not a teacher, under what conditions. We know we can make precursors. We do not know yet the extent to which we can have the children learn to read on their own. We want to join, and that's part of the reason why I come to meetings like this. We want to know whether our collective efforts can ultimately change literacy for 120 million children. If we could bring that many children, we would reduce poverty by 12%, if UNESCO is correct. I'll end with this from Pope Francis. Children are a sign. They are a sign of hope, a sign of life, but also a diagnostic sign, a marker indicating the health of family, society, and the entire world. Wherever children are accepted, loved, cared for, and protected, the family is healthy, society is more healthy, and the world is more human. It is my great privilege to bring this, Chancellor Marcelo, and thank you, Antonio, and Pierre, who's not here, for inviting me. Thank you.